My younger brother set me up on my wedding day, making my fiancée believe I cheated. She believed him, and years later my mother reached out with the truth. Life, for the most part, had been predictable. I grew up in a quiet, mid-sized town in Minnesota, the kind where everyone knew each other but pretended they didn't. The kind of place where the biggest drama was someone parking in the wrong spot at the grocery store or an overdue library book causing a mild uproar. It was a town that thrived on routine, where families stayed for generations, and change was more unsettling than comforting. My parents, Thomas and Catherine Sullivan, fit right into that mold. My father worked in construction, a blue-collar man who believed in hard work and keeping his head down. He wasn't one for deep conversations or emotional expressions. His love was in the little things. Making sure our house was in top shape, waking up before dawn to get to work, and sitting quietly with a beer after a long day. My mother, a librarian, had spent decades surrounded by books, yet she never quite grasped the complexity of the real world. She believed in simple solutions, in smoothing over conflicts rather than confronting them. Their approach to parenting was no different. Keep things calm, avoid fights, and hope for the best. It worked for a while. And then there was my younger brother, Derek. 3 years younger than me, but always acting like he was in some grand competition I never signed up for. Derek had always been a wild card, unpredictable in ways that kept everyone on edge but never quite crossing the line into outright rebellion. He had a knack for spinning reality to fit whatever story suited him at the moment. If I got good grades, he had aced a test that no one could verify. If I won an award, he had offered something bigger but had turned it down. He thrived on attention, but more than that, he thrived on control over situations, over people, over narratives. It was exhausting, but for the longest time I didn't take it seriously. I chalked it up to sibling rivalry, the way kids compete for approval. I should have known better. As we got older, our differences became stark. I followed a path that made sense: steady work, gradual progress. I started at the bottom at a furniture distribution company, hauling boxes, unloading trucks, learning the ins and outs of the business. It was tough, physical work, but I liked the structure, the predictability of it. There was a rhythm to the days, a sense of progress. I put in my time, earned respect, and within a few years I was a supervisor. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Derek, meanwhile, was always chasing something bigger, something faster. He jumped from one scheme to another, each one more ridiculous than the last. He convinced our parents to help him with a business venture that turned out to be a glorified pyramid scheme. He borrowed money he never intended to pay back. He had an uncanny ability to talk himself into opportunities, but an even greater ability to ruin them before they went anywhere. And somehow, through it all, he always had an excuse, a way to twist failure into a near success. He had almost made it, had nearly hit it big, but it was never his fault. My parents, ever the peacemakers, refused to see the pattern. Every time Derek failed, there was a reason. When he dropped out of college, he was too smart for the program. When he lost his job, his boss had it out for him. When he lied, it was a misunderstanding. They bent over backward to justify his actions, even as he left a wake of disappointment and broken promises. And through it all, they would look at me and say, "He just needs time. You were always the responsible one." As if being responsible meant I could absorb the weight of his chaos indefinitely. I learned to keep my distance. I had my own life to focus on, and I refused to get caught up in Derek's mess. But looking back, I wonder if I should have paid closer attention. If I had, maybe I would have seen what was coming. But I was too caught up in my own world. And then came Lily Harrington, the woman I thought would be my forever. I met Lily at a wedding, one of those chance encounters that people write sappy romance novels about. It was one of those crisp autumn evenings where the air felt electric with possibilities, and the golden leaves littered the outdoor venue like nature itself had set the stage for something magical. I wasn't even supposed to be there. The invitation had come through a coworker who needed a last-minute plus one, and I figured why not? Free food, an open bar, and a night out didn't sound like the worst way to spend a Saturday. What I didn't expect was to meet someone who would change the trajectory of my life. Lily was smart, funny, and beautiful in that effortless way that didn't need Instagram filters. She was a pediatric nurse, dedicated and full of warmth, the kind of person who didn't just light up a room but made you feel at home in it. When she laughed, it was genuine, the kind that came from somewhere deep and unforced. She had a way of making people around her feel seen, a rare gift in a world where most were too busy with themselves. We clicked instantly. There was no awkward small talk, no pretense. just a natural rhythm between us, as if we had known each other in another lifetime. By the end of the night, I knew I couldn't let her be just another fleeting conversation at a wedding. I asked for her number before we left, and she smiled as she saved it in my phone, as if she already knew this wouldn't be the last time we saw each other. Dating Lily felt easy in a way that both comforted and scared me. I had been in relationships before, but nothing like this. There was no second-guessing, no trying to figure out if we were on the same page, because we just were. She had this way of balancing my structured, methodical nature with her spontaneity. If I planned a dinner date, she'd suggest we ditch it last minute for a drive to nowhere, just to watch the stars. If I got caught up in work stress, she'd show up with takeout and tell me to take a break. She was everything I didn't know I needed. A year passed in what felt like an instant. I found myself looking at engagement rings without even realizing I had made the decision. There was no agonizing over it, no weighing pros and cons. I just knew. I proposed on a quiet evening at her apartment. No grand gestures, just the two of us, and she said yes without hesitation. Life was falling into place. I had a good job, a good woman, and a plan. Derek, of course, didn't take well to that. His reaction wasn't immediate, but it was there, lurking beneath the surface. The first few months, he played the part of the indifferent brother, claiming he didn't understand why I was rushing into something so permanent. Marriage was a trap, he said. Women always had ulterior motives. Love didn't last. His words were laced with that casual cynicism he had perfected over the years, always delivered in a way that made it seem like he was just stating facts rather than actively trying to poison the well. At first, I dismissed it as typical Derek nonsense. He had never been in a serious relationship, never even kept a steady job, so his views on commitment held no weight with me. But then the comments became more pointed. He started questioning Lily's intentions, making offhand remarks about how she seemed too perfect, how no one was really that good without wanting something in return. He said it jokingly, but there was always something behind his eyes that made me uneasy. My parents, as usual, did nothing. My mother would wave away Derek's comments, saying he was just being protective in his own way. My father grunted non-committally, too preoccupied with whatever game was on TV to acknowledge the tension. It was always like that. Derek would push boundaries and they would let him, as if ignoring a fire long enough would eventually put it out. But Derek didn't stop. It was little things at first. A story here, a fabricated concern there. He would mention to mutual friends that he heard something about Lily, leaving them to speculate without providing any real details. He would bring up ex-boyfriends she had never mentioned, implying she had secrets she wasn't telling me. One time, he even claimed someone saw her having dinner with another man, only for me to confirm later that she had been at the hospital pulling a double shift that night. Still, I ignored him. I had Lily, I had my job, I had a future that had nothing to do with Derek's insecurities. I wasn't about to let my brother's paranoia dictate my happiness. But Derek wasn't just being paranoid. He was setting the stage. I didn't see the trap he was laying for me, how he was carefully placing seeds of doubt in just the right places, making sure that when the time came, the foundation was already cracked. He wasn't just undermining my relationship, he was preparing to destroy it. And I, blind to what was happening right in front of me, was walking straight into it. Derek had a way of sniffing out weaknesses, of knowing exactly how to plant doubt in places where it didn't belong. He didn't need brute force, he preferred precision. A whisper in the right ear, a glance at the right moment, an implication rather than an outright lie. It was a skill he had honed over the years, perfected like an artist perfects his brushstroke. And this time, his canvas was my life. He started small. It was subtle at first, offhand comments about how Lily and I seemed to be rushing things, how engagements should last longer, how marriage was a huge commitment and not something you just jump into. He always made it sound casual, like he was just looking out for me, but there was something calculated in his delivery. Then came the remarks about Lily herself. Doesn't it seem like she always says the right things? He mused one night over drinks. Like, too perfect? He never accused her of anything outright. That wasn't his style. Instead, he let me do the work, let my own brain fill in the blanks. I wasn't an insecure person by nature, but Derek knew how to get under my skin. He played on the natural doubts that anyone would have before a major life change, amplified them just enough that they started to take root. Then he started laying the groundwork behind my back. First, I didn't notice it. I was too busy planning the wedding, too wrapped up in the idea of my future to pay attention to the way things around me were shifting. It was little things, old friends canceling plans more frequently, coworkers giving me odd looks in the break room, whispered conversations that stopped when I walked in. I chalked it up to stress, assuming it was all in my head. It wasn't. Derek had been planting lies, carefully crafted, insidious little falsehoods designed to isolate me, to turn people's perceptions just slightly in his favor. He told mutual friends that I had been bad-mouthing them behind their backs, that I was too caught up in my new life to care about them anymore. He told coworkers that I was planning to leave my job, that I was secretly interviewing elsewhere and taking credit for things I hadn't done. It wasn't enough to outright ruin my reputation, but it was enough to make people doubt me. And that was all Derek needed. I didn't see it coming. And then, 2 months before the wedding, Derek introduced me to Jessica Monroe. "She's an old friend from college," he said, bringing her along to a bar one night. "She just moved back into town." Jessica was friendly, too friendly. The kind of woman who made casual touches feel intentional, who laughed a little too hard at jokes that weren't funny. I remember thinking she was nice enough, if not a little much, but I didn't dwell on it. We exchanged polite conversation, nothing more. I barely paid attention to her beyond the surface. At least that's what I thought. But Jessica wasn't just some random woman Derek happened to know. She was a piece in his game, a pawn he had strategically placed months in advance. I had no way of knowing it then, but from the moment I met her, the final stage of Derek's plan was already in motion. And I was walking straight into it. The night before my wedding, I turned off my phone, just for a few hours. I told myself it was a way to find some peace, to clear my head before the biggest day of my life. I wanted a moment to reflect, to sit in silence with my thoughts and let the weight of everything settle. I ordered a pizza from a local place near the hotel, put on an old sitcom, and let myself relax for what felt like the first time in months. I didn't know it would be the last time I'd feel peace for a long, long time. The next morning, I woke up early, feeling light, ready. I showered, shaved, and put on my suit, adjusting my tie in the mirror with the quiet kind of confidence that comes when you believe your life is on the right path. The sun streamed through the hotel window, and for a moment, everything felt right. I was marrying the love of my life, the woman who made me laugh, who balanced me, who saw me. By the end of the day, we'd be starting forever together. That was the last time I believed in forever. When I arrived at the church, the energy was off. I didn't notice it at first, still riding the high of excitement. But then I saw them. Henry and Deborah Harrington, walking right past me without a word. Her mother was crying. Her father's face was tight, drawn in a way I had never seen before. His jaw clenched like he was holding himself back from saying or doing something drastic. I felt a chill crawl down my spine. Then I saw Derek, standing near the church office. And beside him was Jessica Monroe, the old friend from college he had introduced me to months before. Jessica was holding her phone. Derek had this look on his face. Concerned, pained, the perfect picture of a younger brother caught in the middle of something devastating. He was shaking his head, murmuring something to Lily's parents, his hand on Deborah's shoulder as if offering comfort. I knew then that something was very, very wrong. Before I could open my mouth to ask, a phone was thrust into my face. Messages, pictures, a video, me supposedly at Jessica's apartment the night before, walking into her building. The timestamp lined up perfectly, as if it had been planned. Because it had been. I stared at the images, my brain scrambling for an explanation that didn't exist. Jessica's apartment, the night before, me, except it wasn't me. But how do you argue with a video? How do you refute something that seems so concrete, so irrefutable? I hadn't left my hotel room. I knew that, but I had turned off my phone. I hadn't used my keycard since checking in. There was no proof that I had been where I said I was, but there was manufactured proof that I had been somewhere else. The hotel had already confirmed I wasn't in my room all night. Another lie, another carefully placed move in a game I didn't even know I was playing. But what did it matter? The damage had already been done. Emily had already seen everything, and she was gone. Her parents had called off the wedding. The guests were being told to leave, quiet whispers turning into murmurs, then into something heavier, something worse. The weight of humiliation pressed down on me like a stone, suffocating, relentless. And Derek was there, right in the center of it all, playing the role of the devastated younger brother. He was the one holding Lily's mother's hand, the one speaking in hushed tones to her father. He was the one shaking his head in sorrow, looking at me like he wanted to believe I was better than this but just couldn't anymore. It was perfect, a flawless execution, and just like that, my life ended. I left town, not because I wanted to, but because I had no choice. My job was crumbling beneath me. My friends had already turned their backs. Everywhere I went, I could feel the weight of judgment, of whispers just out of earshot, of people who once knew me looking at me like I was someone else, someone they didn't trust, someone they were ashamed of knowing. I put in for a transfer and left for Denver. Packed up what little dignity I had left, stuffed it into my car, and drove for hours, state after state, until Minnesota was nothing more than a place in the rearview mirror. I thought distance would make things easier, that maybe if I started over I could become someone new, someone untouched by Derek's lies. But the past has a way of refusing to stay buried. The first year in Denver was brutal. The job was different, same industry, different dynamics. No one knew me, which was both a relief and a curse. There were no rumors following me, no judgment in the eyes of my coworkers. But there was also no connection, no history, no sense of belonging. I was just another face in the warehouse, another name tag on a clipboard. I worked long hours, went home to an empty apartment, and repeated the cycle. Friends were harder to come by. Trust was even harder. Every conversation felt like a test. Like I had to measure my words, ensure I didn't give too much away. Because how do you casually bring up the fact that your own brother destroyed your life? How do you explain that you're not actually the person people think you are without sounding like you're making excuses? I stopped trying after a while. It was easier to stay on the surface, to keep everything transactional. Work, bills, sleep, repeat. Then, one night 3 years later, my phone rang. It was my mother, crying. I almost didn't pick up. Our conversations had become nothing more than pleasantries over the years. Surface-level check-ins where she pretended nothing had happened, where she asked about my job and the weather as if my life hadn't been systematically dismantled in front of her. But something in her voice on that voicemail made me call back. Jessica had finally cracked. She got drunk at a bar, started running her mouth to the wrong person. Someone who wasn't just another bystander. Someone who recognized the story she was telling. Because Derek and Jessica had done this before. Not just to me, multiple times. They had a system, a carefully orchestrated game where they'd create scandals, fabricate evidence, plant just enough doubt to ruin lives. They did it to engaged couples, business owners, people with something to lose. Sometimes it was for money. Sometimes it was just for the thrill. And somehow, until that moment, they had gotten away with it. Until someone decided to start digging. It started as whispers. One person questioning a story, another recognizing similarities. Then a pattern emerged. The same woman appearing in different accusations. The same kind of setup. The same perfectly timed evidence. The truth unraveled slowly, but once it started, couldn't be stopped. Lily found out too. She emailed me. Just a simple request. Can we talk? I sat staring at that email for hours. My hands hovered over the keyboard, but no words came. What was there to say? What could she possibly say that would make any of it matter now? But I met her anyway. We sat across from each other in a quiet cafe, the air thick with unspoken words. She looked different. A little older, a little more tired. There was no trace of the woman I had planned a future with. Just someone trying to make peace with the past. She slid a folder toward me. Proof, texts, receipts, screenshots of conversations. Everything that should have cleared my name years ago. She said she was sorry. That she should have believed me. That she should have known better. But it didn't matter. Some things don't heal. Some wounds don't close. Some betrayals cut too deep to ever be undone. And as for Derek, his reputation was ruined. His so-called business collapsed overnight. The truth spread fast and people saw him for what he was. No more lies, no more manipulation. No more getting away with it. The last I heard, he moved back in with my parents. Back to the basement where it all began. Life has a way of correcting itself, I suppose. Even if it takes longer than it should. I won't lie and say there was a grand moment of justice. That Derek was dragged away in handcuffs. Or that I stood victorious in some Hollywood-style courtroom scene where everything was set right. Life isn't a movie. Some villains walk free. Some wounds never fully heal. But here's what I've learned. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even. It's about moving forward. About reclaiming what was stolen in a way that doesn't require retribution, just resilience. I built a new life. Not overnight, not easily, and not without scars. But piece by piece, I put myself back together. I learned to trust again, not in the way I once did, blindly and without question, but with a wisdom that came at a cost. And Derek? His lies finally caught up to him. His carefully constructed image shattered, his reputation gone, his manipulations exposed. He's right where he deserves to be, alone, irrelevant, and no longer in control. But this story isn't really about him. It never was. It's about what happens when your world collapses and you have no choice but to rebuild. About how sometimes the hardest battles aren't the ones you fight against others, but the ones you fight within yourself. To not let anger consume you, to not let betrayal define you. So if there's anything to take away from this, let it be this: be careful who you trust. Some people aren't who they pretend to be. And when life tests you, when everything you know is turned upside down, remember, you get to decide how the story ends. Now, I want to hear from you. What would you have done in my place? Have you ever been blindsided by someone you trusted? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe, because there's always another story to tell, and I'll be here to share it with you.